I was an ordinary college student navigating life's twists and turns. Little did I know that my seemingly mundane existence would soon unravel into a nightmare. It began innocently, a stranger's gaze across the crowded campus courtyard. His eyes lingered, unnerving yet strangely magnetic. I brushed it off, attributing it to chance. But chance turned into persistence. He appeared everywhere. Library stacks, coffee shops, even my favorite park bench. His presence was like a shadow, silent and suffocating. I'd find notes slipped into my textbooks, cryptic messages that hinted at an intimate knowledge of my life. "You look beautiful when you read," one note whispered. My friends dismissed my fears. "Maybe he's just shy," they said. But I knew better. His eyes held hunger, obsession. He wasn't shy. He was relentless. Late nights blurred into early mornings. I'd glance out my window and there he'd be, standing across the street, watching. His face remained hidden beneath a hoodie, but his intent was crystal clear. I felt like prey, trapped in a twisted game. I changed routines, altered routes, but he adapted. He knew my class schedule, my favorite haunts. "You can't escape me," another note read. Panic clawed at my chest. I reported him to campus security, but they found no evidence. He was a phantom, slipping through their fingers. My phone buzzed incessantly. Texts arrived at odd hours, each more sinister than the last. "I see you. You're mine. Soon." I stopped sleeping, my room illuminated by the glow of my laptop as I researched self-defense techniques and legal options. But the law moved slowly, and he moved faster. One evening, as rain tapped against my window, I glimpsed him standing outside my apartment. Fury replaced fear. I confronted him, my voice trembling. "Why?" I demanded. He smiled, a twisted, hungry smile. "Because you're mine," he whispered. Desperation fueled my actions. I reached out to an old friend, an ex-cop who owed me a favor. Together, we dug into his past. His name was Alex, a loner with a history of obsession. Failed relationships, restraining orders, the signs were there. We set a trap. I agreed to meet him, feigning compliance. My heart raced as I stepped into the dimly lit alley. Alex emerged, eyes wild. But this time, I wasn't alone. My friend stood nearby, ready to pounce. "Why?" I asked again, my voice steady. Alex's gaze shifted from me to my friend. "Because you're everything I've ever wanted," he confessed. The handcuffs snapped shut, and justice finally caught up with him. In court, he stared at me with those same hungry eyes. "You'll never be free of me," he vowed. But the judge disagreed, sentencing him to prison. As the heavy doors closed behind him, I exhaled, a breath I'd held for months. Yet even now, I glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see his shadow. The scars remain, the sleepless nights, the fear that lingers. I've learned that safety isn't guaranteed, but resilience is. I survived the unseen observer, and I'll never take my freedom for granted again. Remember, dear reader, that monsters exist beyond fairy tales. Sometimes they wear hoodies and watch from the shadows, waiting for a moment to strike.
I was a shift leader at a Taco Bell. I was always on the floor with my crew, so I was at the front registers or the drive-thru register quite often. I was 24, married, with 2 small children, and I only lived a few streets away from my store. I would often walk to work to save gas. A guy a little older than me started coming in a lot. He was always very friendly, almost too friendly. He'd only come in on my shifts. I started to find out, and then it turned out he was there for every single one of my shifts. I'd told my husband, so I don't think he ever came to our house. But he was a shadow at work. Then one day, I came in and found him being trained by one of the assistant managers. He tried to get put on my shifts, but I freaked out and immediately went to the office to talk to the store manager. She had no idea about how he'd been in the store all the time. She knew there was a guy, but she didn't know it was him. She was horrified. She promised that she'd keep him away from me until she could get him transferred to another store. She called the store closest while I was standing there and got the transfer. He'd be at our store for that day only. His next day would be at the other store, and it would be his home store. She let me take the day off. She called in the other night shift manager. When I came to work the next day, she said that he'd not taken the news well, that he'd have to work at the other store and quit. He came a few more times after that, so I got my husband to sit in the dining room to scare him off. I did not see him again after that.
When I was in high school, the mother of a friend of mine became kind of obsessed with me. One time, when I was 16, she told me she needed to talk to me in private, and I assumed it was about my friend, so I met with her, and it turned out that she was looking for a romantic encounter. She told me that her marriage was unhappy, and that she wanted to be with me. I was a dumb kid and had no idea how to handle it, because I didn't want to wreck my friend's family by saying anything. It got to the point where she would drive around my neighborhood in her minivan, looking for me, because she knew I liked to take walks at night. It eventually ended up in a screaming fight between me and her in a huge rainstorm, because she wouldn't leave me alone. That was what finally convinced me I needed help, so I told my parents about it, and it stopped. She eventually ended up divorcing her husband and moving across the country. I never saw her again.